Welcome everybody to this afternoon's meeting of the Philological Society. You'll have noticed that I am not Susan Fitzmaurice. She sends her apologies. She's away at the moment. That wouldn't normally be a problem with an online meeting, but she's also traveling and therefore can't chair the meeting. So this honor falls to me, and I'm very pleased to say that we have essentially three for the price of one. We have a whole team from the University of Wisconsin-Madison: Sarah Holmstrom, Joe Salmons, and Charlotte Vanhecke. I'm going to talk mainly about Joe, since I think he's leading a team. Joe Salmons has been at Wisconsin, I think, since 1995, and he was professor of German until 2017 and professor of language sciences after that. He's well known to many of you as the former editor of the journal Diachronica, an absolutely fundamental journal in historical linguistics. He's now an associate editor. He's the author of a number of works on the history of German, for example, on sound change. He co-edited the volume on sound change with Patrick Honeybone and the Oxford Handbook of Historical Phonology, among many other things. And he's worked mainly on Germanic languages, but also increasingly on Algonquian languages. And that's what that he and his team are going to be telling us about this afternoon: Iambic typology and Algonquian. So Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Martin. It really is an honor and a pleasure to be here, even if we didn't have a chance to have tea with you beforehand. Every time I've been thinking about this event, all I can think is, oh my God, the Philological Society. So it's kind of amazing for it to really be here. This project grew from a seminar that some of us had 3 years ago. And we got a number of papers out of it about Algonquian historical phonology and comparative linguistics. But none of us are actually Algonquianists, and there are Algonquianists in the audience, and we hope to learn. But there's something sort of liberating in a way, after having worked on Germanic for many years, being able to take a really complicated new data set and try to understand it and not feel like we need to have all the answers. We're kind of working our way through, and this is a case where we are definitely working our way through to a new understanding of something. When I was just starting to think about Algonquian, Will Oxford, a really good Algonquianist, great Algonquianist in Canada, published an article on the history of Algonquian vowel systems. And you can see his quote there. And he basically says that we know a lot about the history of sounds in Algonquian, but they haven't really been interpreted in any kind of modern theoretical framework. Perhaps, he rightly says, due to the significant barriers that the specialist literature presents to non-Algonquianists. This is the truest thing that I have read in a long time, and we are building on that consistently. So what we're doing with this project in this piece of it is tackling the Iambic trochaic law, a generalization about metrical patterns that really reaches back to work in psychology in the 19th century, 1894, and it's often been argued to be rooted in human perception in psychoacoustics. So it's a theoretical topic of some interest, and we think that Algonquian can help us understand some things about it. The roadmap of the talk is very simple. I'll give a little bit of background. I'll hand it over to Sarah Holmstrom to talk about the reconstruction, and specifically whether Proto-Algonquian was iambic, and you can see the answer that we propose there. Then she will turn it over to Charlotte to talk about other structures that we have in the family, namely some trochaic patterns and some tonal patterns. And we're using, as Sarah will explain, tone in a broad sense. That is, that tone is present in the system some way, not that it's necessarily a lexical tone language in the sense of Chinese. Then I will take it back to finish up by talking about what Algonquian can tell us about iambic typology. and with two main aspects, the role of pitch in iambic languages and iambic lengthening. And then we'll conclude. And I will stress here that we are not proposing new analyses of particular languages. I think menominee is the only one that we could really do that for. We're working from what specialists have done, and it is, as Will Oxford says, there's a rich literature, and it's a rapidly growing literature. So here's a map of the Algonquian languages, and you can also see over my shoulder an old map where the Algonquian languages are in a pale green, but somehow the Muskogean languages in the far south are in the same color. So don't take it too seriously. The map here, you see Eastern Algonquian along the east coast of the United States and parts of Canada. That's considered a genetic sub-branch. The rest of the language is not usually considered that to have branches. Plains and Central Algonquian are typically described as regional rather than genetic groupings, although I will say a little bit more on that in just a second. And if you see where Menominee is, that is where we are in Wisconsin, surrounded by two of the Great Lakes, Superior to our north and Michigan to our east. So right in the middle of Algonquian speaking territory, past and present. So here's the traditional family tree showing the whole Algic family. So two distantly related languages, Wiyot and Yurok in Northern California. But then Proto-Algonquian breaks into Proto-Eastern Algonquian, which is a large set of languages, as you can see. That's not a complete list even. And then the rest are grouped as a single unit. Every piece of this has been questioned in even relatively recent times. I think everybody's agreed now that Proto-Eastern Algonquian, that Eastern Algonquian is a branch, but even things like Ojibwe and Potawatomi, which look very, very similar, people have doubted whether that's a close relationship, whether that's a genetic relationship. The way that most Algonquianists talk about this, I guess all Algonquianists basically, again, drawing on Will Oxford's illustration here, but the substance comes from Ives Goddard, a 1994 paper on the west to east cline. You see the languages listed from Blackfoot on the left to Eastern Algonquian on the right. And he uses phonological, morphological, lexical data and argues that this cline spreads eastward so that we have, as he says, a series of successively shallower time depths further east. So that's the way that people tend to see things. One of the big outcomes from our project, and it's still underway, there's a lot more to be done, but one of the outcomes that we're hoping for is to have a more tree-like structure, to have a little more structure to the family tree. Some of this is very speculative at this point. But I think the plains grouping is very plausible. A number of people, including Rich Rhodes, are arguing for a core central group these days. And note that core central does not include the Cree languages and Menominee, which are geographically central. So that's kind of the quick take on that. We did, as part of our project, we did a small lexical survey. Where we took a number of central languages, one Eastern language, Passamaquoddy Maliseet, and one Plains language, Cheyenne, and we're able to get this dendrogram from it. You see that Cheyenne looks closer and Shawnee looks less close to central. This looks like it reflects modern geography, so it's not an ancient thing. It's probably much more about language contact. So with all that introduction set up, I'm going to turn the floor over to Sarah now to talk about the comparative linguistics.
Thank you, Joe. So our first question that we had when we decided to undertake this project was whether we could reconstruct Proto-Algonquian as an iambic language. And we're not going to leave you hanging with the mystery here. We believe that, yes, it was an iambic language. But first, let's just take a step back and give a refresher of the basic metrical phonology and terms to do with metrical phonology. So we define an iambic foot as a weak syllable followed by a strong syllable, and a trochaic foot as a strong syllable followed by a weak syllable. And our iambic and trochaic law formulation that we have here comes from Hayes 1995, but as Joe has mentioned, this generalization goes back actually to Bolton in 1894. And the law says that elements contrasting in intensity naturally form groupings with initial prominence, and elements contrasting in duration naturally form groupings with final prominence. In other words, if the stressed syllable in a language is louder, then the language is going to be trochaic. And if the stressed syllable in a language is longer, then the language is going to be iambic. But even this is described as a law, but it's not really a law in the natural sense. It's kind of more of a generalization, as Joe mentioned, and it's open to question. So one of our main questions with this project is whether the data from Algonquian fits in with this law. Another thing to note here is the absence of pitch, which is one of the 3 factors in realization of prominence and is highly relevant in the Algonquian family in particular. And so this is another reason why we are starting to maybe question how strict this iambic and trochaic law is. This table here shows the languages in the World Atlas of Language Structures and how they are the metrical stress pattern that we have for all of the languages in this atlas. As you can see, 47.4% of the languages in WALS are trochaic, 9.6% of the languages are iambic, 1.2% of languages are dual, meaning that they have both trochaic and iambic feet, 11.5% of languages have no clear foot type, and 30.3% of the languages have no rhythmic stress. So the languages that have no rhythmic stress are, for the most part, tonal languages or languages that are in heavily tonal areas. But to take a closer look at the iambic languages in particular, as you can see, there's only 31 languages in WALS that are iambic. And iambic systems are particularly associated with the Americas, which makes sense for, in that case, the Algonquian language family to have so many iambic languages. But what this tells us then is that since we've only got 31 languages and we also have about 10 or 15 languages within the Algonquian family that are iambic, then just studying the iambic languages within the Algonquian family can tell us a lot about iambic languages in general. And also, if we're finding that our iambic Algonquian languages are not patterning as expected based on the iambic trochaic law, this might mean we need to rethink our ideas of how iambic languages behave, because in many cases, our understanding of iambic languages come from languages like Algonquian, other languages in the Americas and in Southeast Asia and in the Pacific that are less well studied. So we may have more to learn about these languages. So this is a classic iambic example from Hayes 1995, his book on metrical stress theory. This comes from Muncie, which is one of the Algonquian languages. And he is taking this from an analysis by Goddard. And in this analysis, he says that the rightmost foot in Muncie is extrametrical. You can see that in the example below. It's marked in the angular brackets. And he also says that the strong branch of the penultimate foot is what carries the stress. And so what we're seeing here is a classic example of iambic lengthening. And so you can see in this language, the T consonant geminates as a way to satisfy the preference in iambic systems for durational asymmetry. So this is a very classic example of an iambic pattern in an Algonquian language. And I just mentioned Hayes's book on metrical stress theory, and this is actually what got us started on this project to begin with, is this sentence that he has here after describing a couple of the Iambic languages in Algonquian. So he says that the common pattern of left to right iambs in both Central and Eastern Algonquian languages leads one to wonder whether the pattern was a property of Proto-Algonquian. And he also mentions that many scholars of Algonquian languages are hesitant to definitively label the proto-language as iambic. Cowan says that stress is not reconstructed for Proto-Algonquian. Pocket posits an iambic pattern for at least Proto-Central Algonquian, but doesn't go as far as to label the Proto-Algonquian language as iambic. Goddard is cautious and notes, among other things, the difference in the treatment of CVC syllables between Munsee Unami, where the CVC is counted as a heavy syllable, and the other languages where CVC is counted as a light syllable and consonants do not count for syllable weight. And he also says that in addition, a fair number of Algonquian languages do not show iambic patterns. So ultimately, Hayes says that thus one cannot rule out the possibility that iambic stress is not a Proto-Algonquian inheritance, but has arisen separately in more than one branch of Algonquian. But as you will see, based on our analyses, we do not think that this is likely. Now, in a moment, I'm going to show a table of all of the languages in the Algonquian family that we have metrical stress analyses for, and like what we consider their patterns to be. But first, I do want to take a minute to give a brief note on pitch, accent, and tone, and how we are describing tonal, or how we are defining tonal languages here. Several languages in the Algonquian family have been traditionally described as pitch accent, but Purnell in 1999, talking about Japanese, says that Japanese dialects are usually treated as pitch accent systems, but an easier analysis posits just a metrical grid and tone. Additionally, Heim in 2006 says that grammars can include both stress and tone, and pitch accents pick and choose elements from both. So we are following their analyses here, and we're assuming stress and tone as basic types, and that those two types can co-occur in various configurations. For example, in Kickapoo Meskwaki, we have both iambic and tone. So just to give a note on that, that when we call a language a tone language here, we are not always saying that this is lexical tone. Certain languages have what looks like lexical tone, such as a requirement that each syllable has to be high or low, but others clearly have metrical grid and tone, like Purnell is arguing for Japanese. So the only real previous survey of the Algonquian languages for their metrical structures comes from Milligan 2005. So we are using her table here and adapting it with newer analyses that were not included in the original table. And just to note again that we are relying on the literature here and not our own analyses. These are analyses from experts on these different languages. So what you can see here is that we have a lot of iambic languages, obviously. The Plains branch of the Algonquian family, Arapaho, Blackfoot, and Cheyenne, all of these are tonal languages and don't seem to have any metrical grid. But then we have the Eastern Algonquian languages, Unami, Munsee, and Passamaquoddy, which have all been analyzed as iambic languages. Central Algonquian, Montagnais is a tone language, in addition to Meskwaki and Kickapoo, which are also in tone but have iambic metrical grids. But then we also have Menominee, Border Lakes Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, Southern East Cree, Miami, Illinois, and Plains Cree, which have all been analyzed as being iambic. And you will note there's a couple languages, so Passamaquoddy and Plains Cree have both been labeled as trochaic in some analyses, but this is controversial. There's not really agreement on whether they actually are trochaic or whether they are indeed iambic. But overall, looking at this, we can see that there is a strong preference for iambic throughout the system. So when it came to trying to determine whether we could reconstruct Proto-Algonquian as iambic, we decided to use Campbell 2013's guidelines for reconstruction. The first guideline is directionality. Is there a known tendency for change in one direction over the other? The classic example would be that stops widely become fricatives, while the reverse is not as common. The second guideline is that majority wins, and all other things being equal, a sound that's found across most members of the family is likely to be closer to the protoform. Also, another guideline is features in common. So where correspondences differ across a family, they may still have features in common, as in Campbell's example of B, P, and V in Modern Romance. We can say with some confidence that the sound was a labial, since all of those sounds have the labial feature, and indeed we can reconstruct it as a P. And then finally, economy, where a better reconstruction is generally considered to involve fewer changes. So as Joe has already hinted, in our evaluation, we can pretty confidently and easily say that Proto-Algonquian was iambic following these guidelines for reconstruction. Directionality suggests that the proto-language was highly unlikely to be tonal because the correlations of high or low tone across the languages point to a very different sources of tone. Tone is clearly independent in this case, as Charlotte will explain in just a moment. Also, a big majority of the languages for which we have descriptions are iambic, as you saw in that chart just a moment ago, and economy would also point toward an original iambic system. So we can say, pretty definitively that we are reconstructing Proto-Algonquian as an iambic language. One thing to note is that the evidence so far suggests that many of the languages in the Algonquian family used pitch as a cue, which is a shared feature phonetically, but is phonologically relevant here when it comes to the later development of tone, as Charlotte is going to explain, as she describes non-iambic systems.
Right. So yeah, having established that, the family overall seems to have been iambic, I just want to delve a little bit deeper into a few of the languages that deviate from kind of that iambic majority. Starting, so a few trochaic languages that have been argued to be trochaic, and then a few tonal languages. So first of all, this is an analysis looking at the role of pitch in Plains Cree. If you look at the table at the bottom here, this summarizes 3 different accounts from the literature of prominence in trisyllabic nominals here in Plains Cree. So if you look at, account number 1 places prominence on the first syllable, number 2 places prominence on the second syllable, and account 3 places prominence on the final syllable here. So this is just to illustrate what we're working with here. So there's really a number of competing analyses here of what happens in Plains Cree. Goedemans and van der Hulst analyze this or categorize Plains Cree as a trochaic language, following Wolfart and some others. Wolfart says about this, the stress pattern of words seems to depend primarily on the number of syllables rather than on vowel length. In words of 3 or more syllables, primary stress falls on the third syllable from the end. Secondary stress then falls on alternate syllables in either direction, reckoned from the antepenult. However, not everybody agrees with this. There really isn't, a consensus about the metrical grid of Plains Cree. Here we have an alternative account from Flynn, who analyzes Plains Cree as a right-headed or iambic stress pattern. We do see that if you analyze Plains Cree as iambic, it basically violates every universal that has been generally associated with iambic languages. So Plains Cree has right to left foot parsing, which has been assumed to be highly unlikely or even impossible in iambic languages. We have in disyllabic words in Plains Cree carry stress on the final syllable. And although Plains Cree has vowel length, there doesn't seem to be a correlation between vowel length and stress. And Hayes has claimed that there aren't any quantity-insensitive iambic languages. And in fact, the feature is commonly associated with trochees. Then circling back to Goedemans and van der Hulst, kind of responding to this, they say, yeah, we could see how one could make this iambic, right? So again, they were saying that Plains Cree was trochaic or is trochaic, but they can see that, an iambic analysis that gives you the disyllables with final stress, and then you would have to declare the final foot as extrametrical. So this is just to show that the metrical analysis of Plains Cree is controversial. There really isn't, a strong consensus about this whatsoever. Moving on to tone, specifically Cheyenne and Blackfoot. So in the old days, these would have been described as pitch accent languages. So for Cheyenne, Lehman shows a requirement that each syllable be phonemically high or low, and examples of all configurations of those two tones are attested. And then for Blackfoot, Stacy argues in favor of Blackfoot as a tonal system as well. And she cites several obvious tonal processes such as glottalization, accent spread, and tone dissimulation, along with development of low tone. This is not entirely clear to us, but we'll just run with this for now. Okay, so looking at where tone came from, here are a few different patterns of tonogenesis that we see in some of these languages. So in Cheyenne, you have vowel length moving into high tone plus sandy. In Montagnais, you have vowel length or glottal stop becoming high tone. And in Kickapoo, you have a coda H becoming low tone, which is then generalized to all spirans. So these are all different sources of different tone in languages that are across different parts of the territory, and so these seem like clearly independent innovation to us, and so it seems much more likely that you have iambic languages that went to tone in these cases rather than the other way around, right? It seems highly unlikely that Proto-Algonquian was tonal and changed to iambic. You see that the development of tone clearly followed different paths. Why then, if these are separate innovations, why did so many Algonquian languages develop tone? You see that, so one thing that we suggest is that in stressed languages, you can have a great variety of different cues for stress, right? You can have intensity, duration, and pitch, or any combination of those. And it has been shown that languages that rely on pitch as a cue to stress sometimes develop tone from those patterns. And one example of this is what Kapleau has argued for Tibetan. She sees that in phonologically conservative Balti-Tibetan, pitch is a very strong cue to stress. And then in other varieties, the location of that stress corresponds to the position of high tone. And so it looks like this might be something that is also happening in Algonquian. In Menominee, for example, pitch is the main correlate of primary stress. So this looks like a pardon me, transphonologization of cue to a feature. There might also be less direct relationships there, where the presence of pitch could act as a primer to the rise of distinctive tone aligned with other patterns like vowel length, also given the historical quantity sensitivity in the family. And then, the rise of low tone from coda H, like we saw in Kickapoo, would be a little bit more abstract here. Something else that's really interesting about tone in these languages, referring here to what Ratliff has said about tonal languages in general, she says that tone languages are concentrated in 3 geographical areas: East and Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Mesoamerica. And then outside of these areas, tone is found in the Athabascan language family and appears to have developed independently in a number of other languages in the Americas. So, kind of running with that idea, here's a map of the plains languages here in North America. And we have languages that are tonal or that have tonal patterns. We have those colored here, right? So beyond Algonquian, there are other languages in this general area that have developed a tone, including some Siouan languages, Athabascan languages, Apashan, and so on. And these ones are in color, right? So we have the Algonquian languages that have tone in blue, and languages from other families that have tone in green. So it looks like we can add another kind of area to the tonal areas that were suggested by Ratliff, right? So it seems like the tonal languages that we've seen kind of follow that same pattern that has been suggested for tonal languages, that they are very aerial. Okay, so having shown that to us, Algonquian seems to be clearly iambic, Joe is going to go back and tell us what that really can teach us about the typology of iambic systems.
Thank you both very much. We have a whole set of arguments here. I'm just going to go over two of them quickly, and that is the role of pitch and the role of iambic lengthening, both of which have already been talked about to a certain extent. Just as a reminder, the iambic trochaic law associates intensity with initial prominence and duration with final prominence. We do not, sorry, this is just another slide from Peña et al. Reviewing this generalization and showing how long that tradition is. So again, Marianne Milligan's very nice dissertation gives us an initial look at this question, what the correlates of stress are in Algonquian, and we've updated this with some other languages and identifying the sources. Are people using impressionistic or acoustic analysis and so forth? And what you see is that in East and Central Algonquian, we typically have high pitch as the cue to things. In Plains Cree, it's a falling pitch, but we don't get very much duration at all. Border Lakes Ojibwe, which is one of many Ojibwe languages and dialects, shows it. And Menominee has some duration. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. But really, pitch is the widespread cue here. And as Sarah and Charlotte just laid out, that is a likely source of tone. Here you can see, this is from the Linguistic Atlas of Canada of Algonquian languages. Chimoon, it's raining. You see the blue line on the long vowel showing a clear drop in pitch. And this is the sort of thing that we see across the language pretty clearly. So pitch is not expected to be the major cue to stress in iambic languages, but it is a major cue in a whole bunch of Algonquian languages. So to the second issue, iambic lengthening, short, light, iambs violate the iambic trochaic law by not having any durational differences. And Hayes and many other people have argued that these get repaired either by lengthening the stressed vowel or geminating the initial consonant of the following syllable. You saw that in Sarah's example from Muncie early on. And Hayes, there's just, again, something that's widespread in the literature, says that iambic lengthening is widespread and frequent and robust. Other people like Hyde talk about this is something found in many iambic languages, and Hayes is concerned that light iambs violate the law, and they get converted by changing the light syllable into heavy, and a number of other sources, older and newer, talk about light as the most marked type in the language. So we really don't expect to find light feet in these languages. Let me give you a little bit of data from Menominee. As far as I can tell, maybe the most frequent word in Menominee is mashik, and or also. Light, light. And you have the whole list of forms here: akanum, apexic, and so on, chamekat. And these are all light. By the way, in the third example, the AE, that's simply a digraph for a single vowel. It's not a long vowel. These are all short vowels. And C's consonants, as Sarah already alluded to, don't count for weight in this particular language. So even long strings of words in clearly iambic language do not show any lengthening. So that is an unexpected result. Hayes, interestingly, has a lot of, one of the remarkable things about that book is he has a lot of typological generalizations across things. And he talks about vowel lengthening and consonant lengthening in iambic languages. And out of 15 examples of the former, 2 of those are Algonquian, and out of 5 of the latter, 2 are Algonquian. So it plays a pretty big role in his typology. He says that in trochaic languages where you get lengthening, it's typically, though not always, phonetic in character. And that seems to us to imply that iambic lengthening is more expected, more likely to be phonological in nature. So again, we go back and we start from Milligan 2005 to look and see what she found in terms of where lengthening is found in the family. And again, we've updated with some newer work. You see that lengthening is only present in 3 of the languages that are talked about here. Munsey has consonantal lengthening, as you saw. Menominee has phonological lengthening, but only of LL, light, light, feet with a closed head syllable. It also has, as we'll talk about in a second, iambic shortening, which is completely unexpected. Potawatomi also has phonetic iambic lengthening. So it's not a regular feature in the family. This is pretty unexpected. So Milligan talks about iambic shortening in Menominee, and here you can see the quote that we expect it to LL feet to surface as LH, but in fact, in Menominee, some underlying LH feet surface as LL. In other words, the least desired foot type does not get repaired to the most expected, but in fact, the reverse happens. You get preferred feet types being changed into the least preferred. Bloomfield talks a little bit in his massive grammar about consonant lengthening, and he gives an example where an even numbered in an even numbered sequence of short vowels, you can get an N lengthening. So this is the how you say I don't know, Knekenen, and that one next to the last N is lengthening. So this is phonetic and not phonological. Menominee definitely does not have long consonants, and it only involves one consonant. Menominee has a relatively small consonantal inventory, but N obviously is only one piece of that longer puzzle. And he goes on to show in the grayed out part other cases where we are not getting iambic lengthening where we might expect it. So the bottom line is that iambic lengthening does not look widespread, frequent, or robust in the family. We not only get iambic shortening, but we get lots of the least preferred structure in a language like Menominee. And where there is lengthening, it's more limited and messier than it might seem on first glance. And the 2 grayed out pieces are the issues that we didn't really talk about. So to start to wrap up, this has led us to question the iambic trochaic typology itself. And we knew that there was earlier work out there, Gacher Lahiri and Planck and others have raised questions, sometimes significant questions. Right now, there is a stream of literature that there, I think at least 4 works that came out in 2023 that challenge it in a more fundamental way. So as you see in the first case, Mogese, Sonderegger, and Wagner, that they understand this to be, the iambic trochaic law to be, an indirect effect of parsing speech by 2 different things, prominence and grouping, and they see foot perception as derivative of more basic decisions, so that the trochee and the iamb may not play any direct role in speech parsing. And then in a very interesting survey of 30 languages, Klein argues that or shows that a lot of what's happening with foot structure is not about prominence at all. There's a lot more diversity in foot structure. She's looking at things like phonotactics and so forth. So this is pointing in a pretty different direction and toward a different kind of typology. So I think at this point, we're going to have to step back and redo our entire analysis of everything on those terms. So to conclude, Proto-Algonquian looks pretty straightforwardly iambic. The non-iambic systems are either difficult to establish or can pretty easily be derived from an iambic proto-language, but not so much vice versa. Iambic languages emphatically do not fit traditional typologies, so pitch is widespread. And this may be implicated in the rise of tone across parts of the family. And iambic lengthening is definitely not widespread, and it is often limited in surprising ways. So as Sarah said at the outset, because these systems are relatively rare and come from a part of the world where we often lack really good descriptions and analysis, it may be that these typological claims have less solid foundations. And finally, then we see that there are now challenges to the traditional typology. So maybe we've been asking, in part at least, the wrong questions. So we think about this as a case where a close look at a particular family can help us understand what the broader typological situation is. And in some ways, a lot of the metrical phonology is an easy part of the historical phonology of these languages. So with that, Matchwawanan, thank you very much. And these are, this is Menominee, the first one, and then 2 Plains languages, Cheyenne and Arapaho, 2 central languages, Ojibwe and Potawatomi, and finally Lenape and Passamaquoddy, 2 Eastern languages. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, and Charlotte and Sarah, for an absolutely fascinating presentation